What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my reaction and review of the musical fantasy film, Wicked for Good. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if for some reason you haven't gotten out to the theater to see this movie yet, and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time, let's get into it. Wicked for Good, also known as Wicked Part 2, is an American-made musical fantasy film directed by John M. Chu and written by Winnie Holzman and Dana Fox. The sequel to Wicked, which came out in 2024, it adapts the second act of the 2003 stage musical by Stephen Schwartz and Holzman, which was loosely based on Gregory Maguire's 1995 novel, a reimagining of L. Frank Baum's 1900 novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and its 1939 film adaptation. Now, Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, Jonathan Bailey, Ethan Slater, Bowen Yang, Michelle Yeoh, and Jeff Goldblum all return from the first film. Set in the land of Oz before and during the events of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the film explores the relationship between Elphaba and Glinda as they embrace their new identities as the Wicked Witch of the West and Glinda the Good. Now, Universal Pictures and Mark Platt, who both produced the stage musical, announced the film adaptation back in 2012. And after a long development and multiple delays, partly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Chu was eventually hired as a director with Erivo and Grande cast in 2021. The adaptation was split into two parts to avoid omitting plot points and further develop the characters. Principal photography on both films began in December of 2022 in England, but they were interrupted in July of 2023 by the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike and resumed and concluded in January of 2024. Now, Wicked for Good premiered at the Sohai Music Hall in Sao Paulo on November the 4th of 2025 and was released in the United States on November 21st. And critics responded less positively to the film than its predecessor, while audience reception was more favorable. And it has currently grossed $223 million worldwide on a $150 million budget. And at the time of the making of this video, the movie has a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 282 critic reviews, with its popcorn meter currently sitting at 90% based on over 10,000 verified ratings. The movie has a Metascore of 58 on Metacritic based on 58 critic reviews with a user score of 7.3 based on 308 user ratings. And finally, the movie overall has a 7.2 out of 10 on IMDb with almost 19,000 ratings. So just a quick recap of part one of Wicked. It's going to be extremely quick. Elphaba and Glinda, who later becomes Glinda, that was cute, meet as roommates at Shiz University, initially disliking one another. But over time, their rivalry becomes a genuine friendship as they continue to try to navigate school life, social pressures, and a burgeoning romance involving Prince Fiero. Now, Elphaba ends up befriending one of her professors, her history professor, Dr. Dillamon, who is a talking goat. And through him, she becomes aware that the animals in Oz are losing their rights. And she ultimately vows to expose this to the wizard, who at the time she still looks up to. Now, Elphaba and Glinda get an invitation to meet the wizard in the Emerald City, and they go, both of them go, in the hopes of finding a solution to the animal rights issues, but instead they uncover a conspiracy. Now, the wizard, once they meet the wizard, he reveals himself to not truly be magical, but just a man from Kansas who is behind the suppression of the rights of the animals in Oz. And he wants Elphaba to use her magical ability to aid his efforts, but he tricks her into using the powerful Grimoire, which causes the wizard's monkey guards to sprout wings, allowing them to be used essentially as spies. Now, horrified by the wizard's true nature and the pain she has caused, Elphaba rejects him. But Glinda, however, is unwilling to give up her popularity and does not join Elphaba's cause, leaving their friendship fractured. And after Elphaba flees the Emerald City on her broomstick, the wizard labels her as a public enemy, the Wicked Witch of the West, marking the beginning of her villain arc, so to speak, right? And the film ends with Elphaba on the run, her friendship with Glinda essentially over, or at the very least on a break, and Glinda now seemingly in the hands of Madame Morrible. Now, my thoughts on Wicked Part 1, since I didn't make a full video on it, I thought the film was just okay, right? It wasn't the masterpiece that some people were claiming it to be, but it wasn't the dumpster fire that people were saying that it was either, right? I thought the film existed somewhere in the middle. I think just on the other side of good, right? A film that isn't half bad were it a standalone story. A young woman, born different, neglected by her father, bullied by everyone around her, who meets someone from the complete opposite circumstances, and the pair start off as rivals, which makes perfect sense, only to later become unlikely friends. But then the young woman is forced to learn to accept herself and decide what she believes in, and ultimately own her place in the world. And honestly, I think there's real merit to a story like that. But the film isn't a standalone film. In fact, it's a part of a trilogy that not only includes maybe the most popular story of all time in The Wizard of Oz, but that it also includes the second half of this particular story, which is Wicked for Good. And speaking of Wicked for Good, given that the story contained in this particular movie essentially starts at the halfway point, because the story's been split in half, with a fairly well-chosen opening image, I might add, of the yellow brick road being built, right? Now, I came into this thing kind of understanding that the beats were going to be a little more spread out than they might typically be. One, because this is a musical with lots of music and musical performances, and also because this is essentially a 5-hour movie chopped in half. And that being said, some of the scenes do kind of go on, but I'm not going to eat the writer's lunch for that because I tend to write long scenes myself every now and then as a character-driven dramatic writer myself. So I'm not gonna just dump all over the writers for having long scenes. But because a lot of the long scenes involve songs, you don't quite feel it. The story lag quite so much because you kind of get sucked into the music and the musical performances, which I will say were absolutely positively fantastic. Kudos to everybody involved in that, right? Now, I thought the casting was great, as was the acting, and this is in both films. I gotta say that I think Ariana Grande was actually a pretty perfect choice for her particular role in this film as Glinda, and I think she killed it in my opinion. I also think that Cynthia Erivo did a really good job in her role as well, and though this movie was far from perfect, I wanted to take a moment to give credit where it's due. So overall, kudos to the performers here, especially the big two. I do think that they carried the movie. They did what was asked of them, and kind of putting the movie on their back and kind of carrying it from start to finish. Now, I thought the direction was equally impressive here, as I thought the movie really looked good. I liked a lot of the choices and shots throughout the film, though I think there were some directorial omissions that I think hurt the film overall, but I think at the end of the day, this was mostly due to narrative omissions, and by narrative omissions, I mean omissions in the script. So that's where I ultimately lay the blame for what I thought the biggest things that were missing in this movie. I thought the small writing was pretty good. In fact, I actually thought the dialogue fit the film and the characters extremely well, again, especially as it pertained to the two main characters. I found the dialogue between Elphaba and Glinda to be extremely conversational, and even to the point of, I always tell you guys that the best dialogue kind of makes you feel like some of it could have been improvised. And, to me, that's the mark of really good small writing. And I thought that the writing served the story and the pair's friendship extremely well, even down to like the micro, just some of the micro language between the two of them. But as it pertains to the narrative merit of this story, the thing I was really interested to see, the very thing that I knew would ultimately determine how I felt about this film overall, was how Stephen Schwartz and the other writers would handle the narrative overlap with The Wizard of Oz. You know, because we understand by watching the original Wizard of Oz that Dorothy lands in Munchkinland right smack dab in the middle of all this chaos that's already going on. I really wanted to see how Dorothy's contribution to the story would be handled. And, you know, given that this story is told from a different point of view, once Dorothy officially entered the story, I have to say I didn't ultimately like what the filmmakers got together and decided here, not one bit. Now, in my opinion, the filmmakers ultimately decided not to show Dorothy's face in a single frame of this movie, by the way, and I thought that was a huge missed opportunity. The filmmakers now claim that they did this in order to keep the focus on Elphaba and Glinda, which I can appreciate to a certain extent, right? Not wanting to shift the POV, right? That's something that you really have to sit down and think about, because a lot of movies do have shifting POVs throughout the story. But if you tell me, hey, this is really a story about Elphaba and Glinda, and even though Dorothy is in it, we want to kind of keep it a situation where the POV is always either in Glinda's POV or in Elphaba's POV. But I still think that there were a bunch of missed opportunities here, because, I mean, Dorothy actually meets Glinda in The Wizard of Oz, so that scene could have very well been included here, but it wasn't. And Dorothy also spends some time with Elphaba, and those scenes were not included as well. Now, you know, they do show the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion multiple times, and they even show both of these characters in Dorothy's presence. And the only reason we don't see the Scarecrow until the end is just simply because I believe that the filmmakers did not want to give away that the Scarecrow was Fiyero, Elphaba's jump off, until the very last moment, right? And though we've seen the Cowardly Lion both as a cub and a fully grown lion, and the Tin Man, who we know is Bach, and the Scarecrow, who we understand to be Fiyero, by omitting, you know, Dorothy meeting Glinda and being sent down the Yellow Brick Road, where she would ultimately meet her band of companions, they basically removed the part of the story that would have truly galvanized the audience, in my opinion, because that's the part of the story that everyone already knows. I mean, I understand that there's a large contingent of people who maybe have seen Wicked, the stage play, who would go to see this movie, but for the large contingent of people that have not, I think that would have really brought the audience deeper into the story and given the audience a deeper appreciation for this story. It's just like comic book movies, right? Where you go, the largest part of the audience isn't going to be people who collected comic books. So these are going to be people who are watching like Infinity War and stuff like that, things that happened in the comic books for the first time, and you have to consider how they're going to see these stories as well. And I think that part was just kind of, we don't really care about them in this particular film. And I'm not saying that they had to devote the same amount of time to that part of the story as the original film did, right? Because I can understand deep down why maybe we wouldn't see Dorothy meet the Scarecrow, see Dorothy meet the Tin Man, see Dorothy meet the Cowardly Lion, because that would have ultimately switched the POV away from, like I said, Elphaba and Glinda, which is clear the filmmakers kind of wanted this story to kind of stay on task in that regard. But I just feel like they erased the narrative build-up to the climax of the story from Dorothy's perspective, which is when she tosses the water on the Wicked Witch and she melts away, right? In addition to taking character development moments away from her, the very person that would end up, quote unquote, doing away with Elphaba in the end. And though I'd be willing to listen to the filmmakers explain to me that Dorothy's perspective was specifically kept out of this particular story in order to keep the POV honest. Like I said again, as you know, from a mechanical standpoint, you want the POV to remain with the two main characters. I get that. But then they even took away moments, again, like I said, that Dorothy literally spent in Elphaba's presence that could have been shown to us, and they reduced them to not only snippets, but snippets of voices in the distance and shadows on the wall. And unless somebody's going to tell me that for legal reasons they just couldn't put Dorothy in this movie, that's the only excuse I'm willing to accept in this particular case. because this decision had dire consequences as it pertains to the narrative cohesion of the story, as it kind of forced the filmmakers to expedite Dorothy and her friends' contribution to the story at all. And, and it made the second hour of the film, that being Wicked for Good, feel extremely fragmented with little to no fluidity between the scenes from that point on. It kind of felt like you were watching a 10-part series on TikTok, and that every once in a while you were skipping a part. And it just kind of made you, it almost felt like they were fast forwarding the movie. Every once in a while, somebody was hitting the fast forward button. And I felt like, again, it just made the film seem really, really fragmented with very little cohesion. And in the last few minutes of the film, the writers do try to throw in this quick kind of subplot involving the true nature of Elphaba's relationship to the wizard. Spoiler alert, the wizard's her dad. And, the very person that she spent the entirety of the movie fighting against. And I get that would have tugged at our heartstrings a little bit, but we don't spend enough time exploring that relation enough for us to truly care about it. And furthermore, all it really does, in my opinion, is make Frexbar's motivations a bit murkier when it comes to how he treated Elphaba than was probably necessary to ultimately make the point the writers were initially hoping to make about Elphaba's presence in the first place. Elphaba, again, is somebody, her skin was green, she looked different, she was bullied because of it, and her dad treats her bad, and you kind of think, well, maybe her dad treats her bad because her skin is green and he just doesn't like that. But no. Maybe her dad treated her bad because he wasn't her dad at all. And I always warn people about changing the motivations of characters after the fact, because it can literally change how you feel about characters after the fact. And that can be a dangerous thing, especially in movies that have already come and gone. Elphaba's dad was not in this movie, and of course. And so changing how you feel about his relationship to Elphaba, I thought was a bit of a chance to take, if you will. And finally, I thought the ending of this film meandered quite a bit. The film's musical soundtrack, its outstanding musical soundtrack notwithstanding. And on top of that, the fake out concerning Elphaba's fate, her ultimate fate, made the sacrifice she made feel hollow, especially in the wake of, like I said, the ending of the original film. Because look, when you find out that Elphaba's not dead, it really is a huge letdown, especially when you also find out that she basically allowed herself to, quote unquote, get got by Dorothy in the first place. My point is that a sacrifice isn't a sacrifice if you don't sacrifice something real, right? And I think that Elphaba dying for her beliefs would have been the most G thing she could have possibly done, right? And it would have kind of been like, you know what? Hey, man, she stood on business, respect. But instead, Elphaba simply ran off with her best friend's fiance, proving that they were never truly friends at all. So this is a story about friendship that you get to the end and be like, yeah, that's not your friend. That's not your friend, because a real friend would not have ran off with your boo thing, right? I'm like, look, I understand that deep down Fiyero loved Elphaba more than he loved, Galinda. I got that part. But if y'all were truly friends, your homegirl ain't gonna just run off with your dude. And that's just that on that. I'll go down with that ship all day, every day. Even as dudes, that ain't something that you would, that's outside of bro code. You feel me? But, I digress. Now, overall, I'd give this movie a 75%. Or a 7.5 out of 10 if you're thinking IMDb score. And I'll give it a B- instead of a C+ for good measure, simply because there were a lot of things that I do think were done really well here, but narratively, the film was kind of weighed down despite the great things that it did in other areas. I think this film on the whole was cute. Nothing more, nothing less, right? And for the people who are saying that Wicked is better than The Wizard of Oz, I would simply ask, what the hell is wrong with you, right? Now, it's true that this film has a huge advantage over the original, that being the technological advances that have been made in film over the last 80 or so years. But narratively speaking, this story doesn't hold a candle to the original story for too many reasons for me to get into here. Maybe I'll make another video about that, at some point when I have some time. But all things considered, look, if you're a fan of Ariana Grande, the original story, that being The Wizard of Oz, or the original Wicked stage play, then I'm sure you'll get just enough from this film to make it worth the trip to the theater. And even if you're not a true fan, but you've seen the first part of this story, I think it's just decent enough to maybe warrant you finishing what you started, right? But I don't think this film is particularly groundbreaking, at least not narratively speaking, as I said. And that said, I'm already hearing rumblings about a Wicked 3, which makes me wonder what the hell that would even be about. But then again, I did not see the stage play, so bear with me on that. And as a guy who only went to see these two films so that you all wouldn't have to, I can honestly say that despite very respectable efforts by almost everyone involved, I found the films to be just okay. But what do you guys think? Have you had the chance to go check out Wicked for Good? If you have, what did you think about Dorothy's essential exclusion from the story? What did you think about Elphaba's ending? Do you think the writers succeeded in turning one of the most iconic movie villains into a hero? What do you think this story ultimately says about friendship? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe to my new shorts channel and my reactions channel for additional content. The links are in the description. In addition to that, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.